Ever wondered why we yawn all day, but dream of changing the world in a major way? It's the Bored and Ambitious Show.
The Wooden World, how timber built every empire and taught humanity to sustain. 950 years before Christ, King Solomon faced a problem. He needed to build the greatest temple the world had ever seen, a house for God himself. But Israel had no forests, no towering trees, no timber. The Phoenicians did. High in the mountains of Lebanon grew cedars of legendary size, trees so magnificent that poets called them the glory of all lands. Solomon sent word to King Hiram of Tyre, and so began the first great resource trade in human history. Phoenician axes felled ancient giants. Logs tumbled down mountain rivers to the sea. Ships carried them across the Mediterranean, Lebanon's forests, piece by piece, sailing toward Jerusalem. Solomon got his temple. The mountains never recovered. 3,000 years later, 3,000 years, those slopes remain bare. Stone and scrub where giants once stood. The Cedars of Lebanon became humanity's first lesson in a truth we would learn again and again. Take without thought. And eventually, there is nothing left to take. But here is what Solomon could never have imagined, what those bare mountains would eventually teach us. Timber wasn't just humanity's first lesson in depletion. It became our first proof that sustainability is possible, that forests can grow back, that we can learn. This is that story, how we forgot the lesson of Lebanon, and how slowly, painfully, magnificently, we are remembering it again. Fire, the first mastery. Wood transformed into warmth, into cooked food, into the heat that melted copper and bronze and iron. Shelter, beams and rafters that kept out the cold and the dark for 10,000 years. Tools, the axe handle, the plow shaft, the spear, extensions of human will carved from living trees. Ships, oak hulls that carried armies across oceans and traders to distant shores. Wheels, the carts that moved grain and gold and ideas from village to village, empire to empire. And paper, thoughts made permanent, knowledge freed from memory, civilization's hard drive. Wood. Before we had anything else, we had wood. Before coal, before steel, before concrete, before plastic, before silicon, there was wood. For 99% of human history, forests were our factories, our fuel depots, our construction yards. Every great civilization rose on timber. The Greeks, the Romans, the Chinese, the Persians, the Mayans, and many of them fell when they cut faster than the forests could grow. The hills went bare, the soil washed away, the ships could not be built, the forges could not burn. The story of timber is not a footnote to human history. It is human history, written in rings of oak and pine and cedar. The wooden walls shall save you. The oracle at Delphi speaks these words to Athens, a city facing annihilation by Persia. The Athenians debate her meaning. Some say she means the Acropolis. Others know better. She means the fleet. 200 triremes, 40,000 oars, a forest, transformed into floating salvation. Naval power required timber, oak for hulls, pine for masts, ash for oars, and so began a chase across continents. Venice stripped the Dalmatian coast bare, transforming ancient forests into the greatest merchant fleet the world had seen. Spain exhausted the woodlands of Iberia building the Armada, an empire's worth of trees floating toward England. And England? England understood something profound. Control the forests, and you control the seas. The timber obsession shaped everything. Alliances forged, colonies claimed, wars waged, all for the trees that would become warships. Watch the map. Watch the forests shrink. From the Baltic to the Mediterranean, from the Black Sea to the Americas, wherever great trees stood, empire followed. In the forests of New England, the king's surveyors marked the tallest white pines with a symbol, the broad arrow, reserved for the Royal Navy, forbidden to colonists who'd cleared the land, built the towns, lived beside these trees for generations. The Americans had a different idea. Axes swung. The king's trees fell, one by one, in quiet defiance. It was theft. It was rebellion. And it was kindling for a revolution. The 19th century, the New World, and the largest deforestation event in human history. It began in Maine, where lumberjacks first heard the crash of white pine hitting frozen ground. When Maine's forests thinned, the sawmills moved to Michigan. When Michigan's timber played out, Wisconsin, then Minnesota, then the Pacific Northwest. Watch the map. Watch the green recede. Logging camps appeared like fever spots. 1,000 men, 10,000 trees, then nothing but stumps and silence. The camps packed up. The railroads pushed west. The loggers followed. Trees that had grown for 300 years fell in 3 minutes. Ancient forests that had watched ice ages come and go, reduced to lumber in a single generation. By 1900, the great eastern forests were memory. Half a continent, cleared in 50 years. The speed was breathtaking. The scale was unprecedented. And no one, not one person, asked what would happen when the trees ran out. Consider what was lost. The white pine of the Great Lakes, trees so tall their crowns vanished into mist. Wood so fine it built the cities of the Midwest, board by board. The Douglas fir of the Pacific coast, rising 200 feet, straight as cathedral columns. A single tree could frame an entire house, and the California redwoods, 2,000 years old, alive when Rome burned, alive when Christ walked, alive when Cleopatra ruled, felled in an afternoon. Men posed on the stumps for photographs, stood 12 across and still had room. Proud, grinning. They had no idea what they were destroying, or perhaps they simply didn't care to know. And so we invented Paul Bunyan, a giant who could fell a forest with a single swing, whose footprints became lakes, whose appetite was as vast as the wilderness itself. We needed this myth. The men who cleared half a continent needed a story that made them heroes, not destroyers. But look closer at those logging camps, past the legend. You'll find exhausted men working 16-hour days, fingers missing, lungs black with sawdust, driven by wages, by bosses, by an economy that valued lumber over lives, and certainly over forests. Paul Bunyan cast a long shadow, long enough to hide what was really happening. We told ourselves a tale of triumph. The land told a different story, in stumps, in erosion, in rivers choked with bark. The forest remembers what the folk songs forgot. But at the moment of greatest destruction, when the last great pines fell and the hills lay bare, something remarkable happened. A new idea took root. Gifford Pinchot was young, wealthy, and restless. He could have done anything. He chose trees. In 1889, he traveled to Germany to study something that didn't exist in America, scientific forestry. What he found there changed everything. The Germans didn't see forests as warehouses to be emptied. They saw them as living systems to be managed, harvested carefully, replanted faithfully, sustained across generations. Pinchot returned with a radical proposition. What if we treated forests not as mines to be exhausted, but as crops to be cultivated? What if we never cut more than grows back? He called it sustained yield. It was the mathematics of forever. Pinchot found his champion in Theodore Roosevelt, a president who understood that a nation's greatness was measured not just by what it built, but by what it preserved. In 1905, Roosevelt created the United States Forest Service, with Pinchot at its helm. Across America, forests were designated not for plunder, but for protection. 150 million acres, an area larger than France, placed under scientific management. Forestry transformed from extraction to cultivation. Conservation was born. For the first time in history, a civilization asked the question that no empire before had dared to ask. What if we don't have to exhaust? What if the forest can give and give forever, if we only take what it can spare? It was a simple idea. Plant as you harvest. Think beyond the next quarter, beyond the next decade, beyond your own lifetime. It would take a century to prove whether it could work. But the question itself was revolutionary. While America debated what to do with its ravaged forests, two small nations in the far north were quietly proving something remarkable. Finland, Sweden, countries that had industrialized early, that had every reason to strip their forests bare, and instead chose a different path. They planted more than they cut, year after year, decade after decade, not as sacrifice but as strategy. Watch these two lines rise together. Industrial output climbing, forest coverage climbing right alongside it. The same trees that built their paper mills, their furniture factories, their export economy. Those forests grew denser, not thinner. Today, these nations have more forest cover than they did a century ago. Not despite their industry, because of how they chose to practice it. Here is what Scandinavia proved to the world. What 3,000 years of history had only hinted at. Deforestation is not inevitable. It is not the price of progress. It is a choice. And nations can choose differently. The same land, the same trees. One path leads to barren hillsides that never recover. The other, to forests that feed economies for generations. The lesson of Lebanon, finally learned. The mathematics of sustained yield, finally proven at industrial scale. Here is the fact that surprises everyone. The northeastern United States has more forest cover today than it did in 1900. Look at Vermont. In 1850, just 35% of the state was forested. Farmers had cleared the hills for sheep pastures. Stone walls crisscrossed bare landscapes. Today, 75% forest. The trees came back, not through some massive government program, not through technological intervention. They came back because the land remembered how to heal. It happened slowly, quietly, farm by farm, hill by hill. When railroads brought cheap grain from the Midwest, New England farmers couldn't compete. They left for cities, for factories, for the frontier. And behind them, nature reclaimed what had been taken. Stone walls that once marked property lines disappeared beneath ferns and saplings. Sheep pastures became thickets, then woodlands, then forests. We found coal to burn, steel to build with. We didn't need every acre anymore. And so the trees returned. Simply because we let them. This is proof. Proof that environmental destruction can be reversed. That damage we inflict is not always permanent. Nature wants to heal, if we give it the chance, if we give it the time. But here's the harder truth. This lesson hasn't reached everywhere yet. The forces that once cleared these hills now operate on other continents, in forests far older, far more fragile, and far more vital to our planet's future. But the story isn't finished. The same forces that stripped America's forests now operate elsewhere, in the Amazon, the Congo, Indonesia. Satellite images tell the tale, roads spreading like cracks through green, cattle ranching replacing jungle, palm oil plantations consuming wilderness that took millennia to grow. These rainforests hold carbon measured in billions of tons. Released, it would accelerate climate change beyond our worst projections. Yet look closer at the map. Protected areas holding firm. Indigenous territories where the green remains unbroken. The battle is real, but it is still being fought. The developed world took 2 centuries to learn what depletion costs. The tropics are learning it faster. In Brazil, young rangers patrol boundaries their grandparents never thought to protect. In Indonesia, communities are choosing forest over plantation. This is humanity's final exam on the lesson timber has taught for 3,000 years. And this time, we know the answers. And now, something unexpected. Look closely at this panel. Layers of wood grain, each crossing the last at perfect right angles. This is cross-laminated timber, CLT, and it's changing everything we thought we knew about building. Stronger than steel by weight, fire-resistant. And here's what matters most. Every beam, every panel, every column is carbon captured from the atmosphere, locked away not in a vault, but in the walls of the building itself. The material we nearly exhausted, it's becoming the architecture of survival. Mjøstårnet, 85 meters of timber rising against a Norwegian fjord, the world's tallest wooden building. But it won't hold that record long. In London, architects draft wooden towers for the Thames. In Tokyo, plans emerge for a 70-story wooden skyscraper. Chicago, Amsterdam, Sydney. Across the globe, engineered wood is replacing steel and concrete, the materials that defined the 20th century giving way to the material that built every civilization before it. Only now we build smarter. Each tower is a vertical forest, each beam, decades of sunlight transformed into structure, the oldest building material on Earth, becoming the most important for our future. 3,000 years ago, Solomon built his temple from cedar. Today we build towers from timber, but with wisdom he never had. Every wooden building is a forest standing vertical, carbon that would warm our atmosphere, locked away for centuries. The circle closes. The oldest material, the newest thinking, and the same simple truth the trees have always known. Timber is the story of humanity learning. Slowly, painfully, incompletely, learning that we can take from the earth without emptying it. The Cedars of Lebanon taught this lesson 3,000 years ago, though we weren't ready to hear it. The bare mountains still whisper their warning to anyone who will listen. But we did learn. The Scandinavians proved that industrial civilization and growing forests can coexist. Finland plants more than it cuts, year after year, decade after decade, century after century. The recovering woodlands of New England proved something perhaps more important, that damage can be undone, that nature forgives, if we give her the chance. And now, the tropical rainforests, the Amazon, the Congo, Indonesia. They are the final examination, the test of whether humanity has truly absorbed what timber has been teaching us all along. The lesson in the end is simple. Cut faster than you plant, and eventually there's nothing left. Plant as you harvest, and the forest lasts forever. 3,000 years, countless civilizations. And it comes down to this. The trees think in centuries. Perhaps it's time we did too. We destroyed much. Entire mountain ranges stripped bare, forests that stood for millennia, gone in a generation. But we are learning to sustain what remains. And the trees, patient, slow growing, carbon storing, keep teaching us the same lesson they've taught every civilization that would listen. Think in centuries, not quarters. Plan for grandchildren you'll never meet. The rings of an ancient oak hold more wisdom than all our quarterly reports combined. The forest remembers, even when we forget. But here, in the mountains of Lebanon, 3,000 years after Solomon's axes fell silent, new roots reach into ancient soil. We are learning to remember too. Global net forest loss has slowed by 50% since the 1990s. Temperate forests are now expanding. Mass timber construction grows 15% each year. The lesson Solomon's builders never learned is finally spreading.